All right, John McIntyre here. I'm here with Bill Muller. Bill, what are you going to show us today?
John, I got a couple things. One is uh, uh, a technique, a method I call the drop-in dialogue method to put into emails. As you know, my business is mostly around emails. And the second thing is um, how to do more story-based emails for e-com, which is what a lot of
Hmm.
e-com brands don't do very well. So I have a great AI shortcut for them to get a leg up on that.
Fantastic. Well, let's get into it.
Okay. Let me share my screen if I could.
Hmm. Yeah, it's all set up, I think.
All right, can you see that?
I can.
Okay,
Yep.
so super simple. These are just the two things we're covering, the drop-in dialogue method and creating stories for e-com. So let's get into it. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about using AI to inject a voice in your email that isn't yours and make it engaging, because the idea behind this is, when you're writing an email, it's just your voice for the most part. It's going to sound like you talking. But real life is more dialogue, right? So why don't we use AI to kind of create some short, fictionalized conversation dialogue snippets into the email? And we can do that with some different character archetypes, the skeptical spouse, the clueless but curious friend, the inner critic, the overexcited customer, your future self. You could add a dozen more. And if you couldn't think of any, you could go to AI and get some more. So what we're really doing is we're just dropping this in to make it more entertaining, because when you think about it, you're writing an email in your voice. If it's the same all the time, this is a nice little pattern interrupt style wise. So I won't read this all word for word, uh, but I do want to say that, sure, could you just do this yourself? What I'm going to show you might seem simple, like you could think, all right, I can do this yourself. But like everything with AI, you can do anything you're about to do with AI yourself. The point is to save time. So yeah, I could just create these snippets of dialogue myself, but AI is actually pretty good at it, and it's pretty easy to do. So here's why it works. It breaks up the rhythm of an email. It creates an instant show but don't show show don't tell moment. It humanizes your message, builds rapport. It's easy to plug in. You could even test different voices if you want, if your list was big enough to do that. It's also a way to disarm resistance, because you're using voices and not you just telling people this is a good thing. And you can add a little bit of drama and energy and personality. Actually, you'll see that in a minute. Uh, so I'm talking about really short snippets here, like 3, 4, 5 lines of dialogue. A lot of copy voice kind of feels flat by default. So this adds a little bit of pop. All right, so what cases do you want to use this in? Like, well, you can use it to warm up the email at the beginning, tell a little story with dialogue. You can reframe objections inside the sales copy itself. You can add personality to otherwise dry CTS. Although I had trouble making this work, and I'll show you in a minute. I kept it in here just in case people can make it work somehow. So I'm showing this kind of warts and all. And then teaching through contrast, past self versus present self, if you like the future you part. So here's what you do. You basically write your email. And let's say the main idea of the email is you don't need a massive list to make real money from email. All right. So just choose a character for the dialogue, one of these that we mentioned before. And then you just prompt AI like this, and I'll read this. Insert a brief dialogue between me and a skeptical friend about why someone needs to solve problem X or take action Y. Make it funny but pointed. Aim for 3, 4 lines max, but if you feel a few more lines are necessary, that's fine. It's not a hard limit. And then there's two other ways to write this prompt. Write a short exchange, write a 3, 4 line conversation between me and a skeptical friend, and then you can just explain a little bit more. And then this last line is kind of important. It kind of conveys the tone you want this dialogue to be. And in this case, it's make it friendly but a little snarky. Now, you could come up with all sorts of different variations on this, but this is the one that I chose for this example. So You write your email, you come up with the character, you insert this prompt and choose your tone, and then you drop it into the email that it comes up with. So let's look at an example before and after. So before, let's say your email copy says, most people think they need a list of 10,000 to make real money from email, but I've seen it happen again and again with lists of 500, 250, or even fewer. What matters isn't the size, it's the story you tell. Okay, this is pretty typical copy you might see. There's nothing wrong with it. Here it is with dialogue that AI came up with after giving it the prompt I just showed you. Quote, you're telling me someone made $5,000 from a list of 137 people? Yep, and I saw the receipts. Was it their mom and 136 aliases? Nope, just a tight list, a good offer, and a damn good story. And then the previous lead we saw comes after that. So you see it's kind of just a warmer, more totally dialogue driven. And you didn't have to sit here and come up with this dialogue. You just, obviously, after you put in the prompt, it put this out in 2 seconds. You could have asked it for, give me 10 more variations and pick one. So obviously, if you didn't like what it gave you, just kind of prompt it for more. So like I said above, this tone was friendly but a little snarky. That's what we prompted AI with. You can change it. You can make it into the voice of a sarcastic friend, a wise old uncle, the neurotic neighbor, your coworker who's got a crush on you. I mean, whatever you want to think of. You could even build a cast of recurring characters, just like sitcoms do. And you can rotate these voices if you wanted to. So, but I do want to mention something about that. You know, these are fictional, and I got some really important things to say about that because alarm bells went off in my head like, hey, these aren't real. So I'm going to get to that in a second. So just a couple more example outputs of this. Here we kind of labeled what was talking. I don't know if I would use friend or whatever, but this is you know, editable. Friend, wait, you made $5,000 from a list of 100. Yep. What, were they all family members with burner ears? Nope, just a solid offer. So you can see how it can put some humor in there. And if this wasn't your style of humor, you could ask it for a different style. And so this is very similar to the first one, just subtly different, but that's how it works. So these are some example prompts to try if you like this idea. First one says, write a short dialogue between me and my future self. My future self has just finished a 50K launch. I'm asking how they did it. Keep it short, funny, and inspiring. Here's another prompt. Write a 3-line conversation with my inner critic who thinks this story-based email is too weird to send. Number 3, give me a fake text exchange between me and my friend who doesn't get why I'm so obsessed with email. I like this last one because I've actually written emails where I've done screenshots of emails. That's just really attention getting when you can kind of, I've written probably at least a dozen emails where probably more than that, where I'm sharing text exchanges with my friend. There's something really voyeuristic about that can be entertaining and hard to resist. So when do you use it in email? We can use it in a lead, like a cold open. Just drop it in there just like that. And then you just flow into your story, which is kind of what we just saw in the example. You can use it as a bridge between ideas or set up a deeper point. And then here's some dialogue you can see that does that. And then the rest of the email would unpack the psychology or strategy behind it. You could use it to introduce an objection in order to pre-handle that objection, right? You could insert a character who says the quiet part out loud, you know, like what everybody's thinking, just to get it out there. And then that means you can address it in your email copy. And of course, you can use this on sales pages or all sorts of things too. I'm just focusing on email in this. And then finally, you can use it as a closer or a CTA softener. This is the one I didn't like. Let me show you this. So you can, like, in other words, instead of doing a regular CTA, click here to blah, blah, blah. It gave me this idea. Dialogue that says, so are you going to sign up? Quote, I already did. I just didn't want you to know you were right. Okay. It's kind of funny, but I just can't imagine this working in an email. So that's my note here, is that I don't actually like this use case of using it in a CTA. I think CTAs ought to be clear, direct, to the point. You don't want to sell from your heels. Get to it. Don't play games. This seems to be like game playing here. But I left it in the presentation because maybe somebody can see this and make this work somehow. I don't see it personally. And it's also, I left it in here because it's a good example of how you really got to vet what AI gives you with a cold eye. So it's going to throw all kinds of things at you. And, people that aren't as experienced with words or copy, they will just copy and paste what comes out of AI sometimes without really looking at it. So we're lucky because we're experienced in all these things as copywriters. But anyway, that was my problems with this part. So you can also use it to repurpose or remix old emails. You could keep the core idea of your email. You could swap the original story for some drop-in dialogue and maybe change the tone or to make it fit. It's still a rerun in disguise. You're just using conversation instead of narrative. I've only done this once and it worked pretty well, but it took a lot of adjusting on my part to make it work. And really, the email wasn't all that much different from the original. I think if you just drop in dialogue, it'll maybe be enough so that people don't recognize the previous email if it's been a long time since you ran it, like say a year. But it's another idea for you. So here's some common workflows. Just to wrap this up. I have three use cases here. Let's say you're writing a fresh email from scratch. And your starting point is you have a core idea or CTA. Well, the dialogue will help you come up with an opener, a story device, or the CTA, which we talked about. I mentioned this. Another use case is remixing an old email. You already have the email. You're swapping out dialogue for a new twist, or you're punching up a flat draft. Let's say your draft is like, oh boy, this is my voice again. It doesn't sound good. I've written 100 emails like this. Well, this is a way to kind of drop in some personality with a little bit of dialogue. I've written some sales pages where I'll put in dialogue just to switch it up. All right, so this is how I felt the need to disclose that this is kind of like the way AI said it. Your email doesn't have to say more. It just needs to sound more alive. And one tiny voice of contrast can do that better than 5 paragraphs of preaching. I was a little self-conscious because this does sound like AI writing, but I thought the point was pretty good. That's why I found some value in this dialogue thing. All right, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. And that is, hey man, you're just making up shit. You're just making up fictional stories. What about credibility? You just can't claim these are your friends when you're not, right? I'm very conscious of this. I do not like using stuff that's fake or made up. So I wanted to address this. So let me talk about this for anybody watching. I get it. If this is your resistance, it's my resistance too. So yeah, first of all, yes, these are fictional conversations. They're not, you didn't transcribe a real event, but you did dramatize the truth, and that's not unimportant, that you're really getting to a deeper truth. So you could rationalize it by saying, well, I'm compiling credible composites just like storytellers do and screenwriters and journalists. So you could say that's not dishonest, but it's illustrative. So another way to look at it is you're not tricking your audience, you're helping them imagine the internal debate they're probably already having themselves. Now, I've seen sales pages that really take liberties with this type of storytelling stuff, especially in the supplement niche and all that, and a lot of those medical 40-minute VSLs that don't have controls where you can fast forward or speed it up. They use this stuff all the time, and I personally have a problem with made up stories. That's why I'm spending just a couple minutes on this. So yeah, so this is sort of justification for it. And you can read this. It's just more of the same, but I put this in highlighter because this is, all of what I just explained really is not good enough for me. I personally can't do it this way. So I'm about to show anybody who agrees with me that they just can't make up stuff and pass it off as something that happened. There are ways to get around this. But I did want to mention all this for people that are using it. I don't want to be super judgmental about it. But here's how to use this method with more transparency. You can just frame it in certain ways. So in highlighting, in the yellow highlighter is you introduce it this way. Ever had a conversation like this in your head? and then you put the dialogue in, and you're not claiming it's real, but it's a conversation in your head. I think that's perfectly fine. Or you could say, if I could go back and talk to past me, it might sound something like this. And then you put in, dialogue that fits. So now the reader knows it's not a transcript, it's a dramatization, but it still hits because the dialogue itself speaks to the truth and the voice inside the reader's head. Another way to do it is to say, my inner critic said, again, putting the voice in your own head, not claiming it was a friend of yours on the outside. Or you could go full on transparent and say, hey, sometimes in my emails, I invent a short fictional dialogue. To me, this is kind of clunky. This is where you're kind of pulling back the curtain fully and saying the story is made up. I don't think I would do it this way, but might work for some people. Oh, I also wanted to mention, this is, I don't know how many people watching are familiar with, I'm sure everybody knows who Andre Chaperon is, but years ago he had this thing called Matt versus Frank, and these were two fictional characters he created that basically created the contrast between not taking action and taking action, succeeding and not succeeding. Sort of like that famous billion-dollar sales letter for the Wall Street Journal, or two guys graduated from college and one becomes a success and one doesn't. And what was the difference? Well, one of them subscribed to the Wall Street Journal or something like that. So this model can be effective. So you can Google this, but Andre had some pretty cool ways to pull this off. My point being, Matt and Frank were fictional. They weren't real, but Andre was upfront about that and still made good use of it as sales copy in various formats, emails and sales pages. All right, so I just talked for a long time. Do you have any questions there, John?
I mean, this keeps coming up in all the sessions that I've been recording with people, which is that if you don't understand marketing or copywriting to begin with, it's going to be very, very difficult to get what you want out of AI, because a lot of what we're talking about here is not just it's the prompt itself, but people need to understand like some of the principles behind it, the nuance around it, the emotional, the psychology, like all this other stuff to really know what they're doing here. If they're just going to go and do dialogue, if they would just take one of the random prompts and just do it, they could run into these ethical things like you mentioned. So that's just an interesting thing that keeps coming up, where it's like you really need to understand the tool, but you need to understand the marketing, which I think a lot of that's what this is the principle being we need to add dialogue, whether it's written by AI or not, to increase or to improve the aliveness of the copy. So I fucking love that.
Yeah, it is a good point, that if you don't know marketing, that's why you can make the case that AI is never going to replace copywriters, because the average person doesn't know what good copy is. Or I keep telling people all the time that when people see those words sprinting across the screen in ChatGPT, it gives you such a magical feeling. I think to the layperson, they think, oh, this is good because everything's spelled correctly. It never makes a typo, right? And so you think it's good. Just like I could shoot a little movie with my iPhone, and I couldn't make a great film out of it, but Steven Spielberg sure could, because he knows the craft of movie making. And so anyway, little bit of inside baseball. The next thing I was going to show you is less insider copywriting to stuff, but anyway, that was that one.
Yeah, cool. I mean, sounds good to me. I mean, this is something that I do not do. I mean, I don't consciously or intentionally think about this. I probably should. Like watching this, I'm like, man, I'm hearing that thought in my head, man. I should be doing this. I think my copy is decent depending on what I'm writing about, but I rarely put something like dialogue like this in. It reminds me of Daniel Throssell does a very good job of this. His
Yeah.
emails, I think he might have mentioned it somewhere. I don't know if he would do fiction, maybe he does fictional stuff too, but when he tells stories, you've got the recurring, like a sitcom. Like I think in one of his products, he talks about that whole sitcom idea. You've got these different recurring characters that you get to know and you feel like you're a part of Daniel's life. It's a whole thing. That's what this reminds me of, but a way to do it with AI. I don't know if Daniel would recommend, like he doesn't seem to be super AI. Anyway, that's a whole tangent. So
Yeah. No, he's definitely a master at that. He's turned himself into a character. If you kind of go into his stuff, you see that he's not in real life. He's maybe not quite the person he portrays himself to be in his emails, which is, you know, pretty great.
Probably not. Probably most of us are not like that, you know. Like it's the yeah. I've met people before, and I think they were a bit disappointed. They're like, "Oh, you're not who I thought you were based on what I'd projected or seen you on." You know, that's one of the
Yeah.
limitations, I guess, of
Yeah.
this kind of work. Anyway.
No, but he definitely came to mind as I was putting this together because he's all about storytelling and creating characters and people in his life as well. So he's really
Mm-hmm.
good at it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's that. All right, the next one is we're going to talk about ecom, and I subscribe to everybody's list, so I get a ton of emails, and I get text messages, and I just think there's so much money being left on the table with ecom just because they rely on images and branding and discounts and these huge images and emails that make it look like magazine ads. And I just think people tune them out. And I think there's a huge opportunity lost by not explaining the product. And they just very rarely tell stories. There are some that do. And I pay attention to those, but we've all seen ecom emails that are just utterly devoid of stories and compelling information. Not completely, but it seems like 90% of the emails that come in are like summer sale. Come get
Mm-hmm.
our thing. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, this is something I helped create for a client. Something like this, not exactly like this, but so the idea in a nutshell is to get some story types, and then insert them into emails for ecom, which would be a total pattern interrupt and would stand out in the inbox. So the book that I'm pointing out here is a really great book. It's by David Garfinkel. He's a legend. It's called The Persuasion Story Code. In it, he mentions story types. And it's not the only book on stories and marketing. There's a ton of them. There's a million of them. But this was a good one. And I thought I would go to this as a source and then go to AI and say, look, these are 10 story types. Please, well, I'll show you the prompt. But we're talking about origin stories about a prospect's pain, stories that predict the future, what copywriters like us would know as future pacing, reassurance stories, which would preemptively ease concerns or doubts before they arise, stories that explain, stories that build trust, discovery stories. These could all be used for ecom, and they just almost never are. Quote, I couldn't find it, so I created it stories. I know a great ecom brand that could really do this, but doesn't really. They have a great story about how they created a product. Social pressure or them versus me stories. Stories about top of mind pressures. And then transformation stories. So, as David Garfinkel says, effective persuasion doesn't have to be full on, well, they shouldn't be full on huge novel-like stories. We're just talking about little tiny micro stories. They're short and emotional, designed to be inserted anywhere. So they work for a variety of reasons. I'm not going to read all these, but stories obviously work in many different ways depending on the type of story. And this is just a list of ways that they work. So here's what I did. So the example I used was, let's say there's a wristwatch artisan named Lorenzo. And in fact, this is based on a brand. This is not his real name, but I do know of a brand of a watchmaker who makes very limited number of handcrafted watches. They're kind of high-end watches. They're really cool. And let's say he's sending out emails instead of just saying, hey, this watch was just released, it's on sale, buy it for this discount. Why don't we tell a bunch of stories about it? So here's how you can use AI to do that. So all I wrote was, let's say I sold handcrafted watches from an artist named Lorenzo. Give me a list of 10 story types that would work for this ecom brand. ChatGPT said, perfect. Great idea. Here's 10 powerful story types tailored specifically for your e-commerce brand. One, the maker's origin story. And then look at this, it gave sample copy. Now, again, it just made this up, But the reason I'm showing you this is because let's say you're writing emails for an e-com client. This would give you all sorts of ideas to give to them to say, do you have anything like this? Like, obviously, this is not going to be accurate to their real experience, but they might go, yeah, I didn't make my first timepiece on a borrowed lathe, but actually I did do it in this other weird way that would make for a good email. And I wouldn't have thought of that if you didn't show me this. So that's the idea of these, each one of these. The watch that almost wasn't. Like if I sat down and tried to come up with these stories, I don't know if I would have thought of all these. This one would be the behind the scenes of a piece that nearly failed. You could do this for a lot of different e-com products. In his case, the brass bezel was ruined twice. But the email could say, but Lorenzo doesn't give up anything he believes in. So again, this probably isn't accurate to what he did, but it might spur an idea that he had, or it just might be wrong in the exact detail that he could fix. You could tell a story showing his eye for detail. You could do an email about how his most iconic design was developed, the creation of his signature style. Well, it all started with this. That's a story. He's got all these stories in him. He just doesn't know how to get them pulled out. And let's say you are writing for this client, this is how you would get them out. And then it's another conversation that's not unimportant, and that is, okay, how do you get these stories from Lorenzo? The way I've worked with clients in the past is a variety of ways, however it's easy for them. For instance, I had one client who would I'd say, look, man, when you're in the store and you see something, he was a fitness trainer. So I said, when you're in Costco and you see something that would be horrible for your clients, just call me and leave a long voicemail and I'll turn it into an email, because that was easy for him to do. I just made it easy for him. And these are the types of stories that he would, or any other client could come across. You could spotlight a customer who cherishes their watch. You could write about the creator himself or herself, just how he values time, because we're talking about watches here. So again, this would only be for this particular product. But if you sold something else, there'd be a different thing other than time you could focus on. Why this guy refuses to mass produce. Okay. Wouldn't fit every e-com brand, but if it was a mass produced item, you could write maybe something about that. The unexpected source, tell the origin story of a unique material or component. And you can see with each idea that AI came up with, it gives you sample copy that, really illustrates what it's talking about. The watch that was passed down, a multi-generational moment, like a keepsake sort of thing. And again, this wouldn't be what happened for this client, but perhaps he does have a story that's similar. The hidden detail. Tell a story about a subtle, almost secret part of the design. So these are just 10 ideas it gave at a first pass. It probably could come up with 30 more. And so this is a way for any e-com brand to tell stories when a lot of them could be excused for thinking, well, I just sell a thing. I don't know how to tell stories. I'm just a guy who makes welcome mats or something. But you can make stories about anything.
Yet again, proving the point that you need to have some understanding of storytelling and marketing and copywriting and all that good stuff to actually know to go to ChatGPT and actually talk about this. It's like 10 story types. So you saying like with this one, the prompt was pretty simple. It was like, just give me 10 different story types for this. You could take, by the sound of it, sounds like that's what you might be suggesting, is going and getting the persuasion story code, for example, or going and getting, what's that? I mean, there's a bunch of them. So many different story frameworks. You could take one that you know of. There's plenty of books, of course, tons of different experts who write about their own particular story framework.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could just start with ChatGPT. Let's say all you know is that, man, I have an ecom brand. I need to write some stories and emails. You wouldn't have to get any of these books necessarily. Just go to ChatGPT and go, I want to do this. What are some story frameworks? Or how just begin by saying, how would I tell a story in an email? Like what types of stories? And it could give it might not pull out the stories from this particular book, but it's going to know a ton of them because it knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say you would need to know marketing and copywriting to know the value of this or how to do it, I'm like, well, AI knows all that. So just go to AI and ask it. So um, that's the crazy thing about these tools now.
I mean, one thing I've done is you know, one thing I keep talking about is just because everyone's got AI, it's not really an advantage. So it's all how can I stand out? And one way is to bring you into it, or in this case, Lorenzo, like it's this your story. I mean, this has always been the case, but even more so now, I think, is bringing your story into it. So often, sometimes I'll go into like I know I want to write a story. I know I have some idea, or maybe I know what point I want to make. You know, maybe it's that AI is only as good as the it's just a tool like anything else. It's only as good as the person using or building the tool. And then I might say to ChatGPT, man, give me like 10 different stories or story types, you could say. Or it might be like, give me 10 like metaphors or analogies are good. Like, give me some questions that might prompt me to think about. I guess then AI is prompting me, which is kind of a bit meta, but questions that prompt me to then think about stories from my life that you can then circle back and relate this to this idea that a tool is only as good as the person wielding it. Um, which then brings in like it's sort of a different way of going about what you're saying is finding ways to how can I find a story from my own life or from the client to illustrate this point that we're trying to make.
Yeah, I've actually done that. The phrase I use is interview me. Pretend that you're uh, a journalist and you're interviewing me for this. Like, what questions would you ask me? Because I pull these stories out of me somehow. You know, you're in the role of a journalist who's interviewed thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
It would do a very good job at that.
Right. Okay. I'm going to try this literally after we chat. I'm writing this down in my chat GPT window right now. I'm like, this is great. Um, It's so cool, man, just seeing how different people like we all sort of have a different way of, we all think a bit differently, a different way of writing. It's really fascinating to me, even though, like, I get the story type thing, just to see this and go, oh, yeah, like it little sparks my thinking. Like, okay, I haven't thought about this story types example, for example. Like, I might have a story about this thing happened when I was a kid and I know how to relate it to this other thing. And that's cool. But, I like that idea of getting 10 different story types or interview me. See, I haven't done that before. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it can play so many roles and serve so many functions that the more you play with it, the more you see that it will do pretty much anything you want it to.
Right. Fantastic. Okay. I think that was the other thing. That's right. Someone asked I mentioned in the beginning, someone asked how does Bill go? Let me bring it up. I've got the survey right here, I think. I know it's not up. Let me grab it. Someone said, how does Bill, I was not just impressed, et cetera, et cetera. Bring him back to talk about email and stories and how to start the email with a story that seamlessly merges into the product offer. So if you have a little bit, another 10 or 15 minutes, I'd love to see that. It sounds like he wants you to uh, talk about how to so like maybe take a story and then show how you would seamlessly merge that into a product offer. Could be for e-commerce, could be for something else.
Yeah, I've actually done this. It does a really good job at it, and I will tell you that I used to take great care in writing that prompt to make sure it did what I needed it to do. And as everybody's finding out now, AI is getting better and better. So, and I could probably show you how to do this, but the big picture view of it is just go to ChatGPT and say, look, I've written an email, or let's say you're starting with the story. I've written a story. I sell XYZ product. I want to use this story to sell my thing, but I want to make sure that the story segues naturally into the product. It shouldn't be too abrupt. It should flow naturally. Before you write it, please give me a list of what you see as being possible tie-ins and related points that would make this work. So instead of it just writing it, it would say, okay, like let's say here, let's use this. Let's say I'm selling these watches. And let's say I had an appointment at the doctor's office this week and I was late for it or something. Like that was my personal little story, or just any story. You just it is amazing that I'm convinced that almost any story can be used to sell almost anything. There is a way to uh, tie into whatever you're doing. Sometimes you have to do backflips, and that's not good, but for the most part, it's easier than people think. And ChatGPT makes it even easier, or Claude, whatever you're using. So
Mhm.
the prompt I just described would be the way to do it. Um, so I'll give you an example, and I'll just talk through this, and I have it in my files. If you want, we could kind of pause it. We could pause the video, and I could find it. We can come back. But I don't know about where you live. Are you familiar with those little libraries?
Oh, I've heard about these. They're not in South America. The pop-up libraries, right? The neighborhood, you go in, you swap a book or something.
Yeah,
Is that what you mean?
they look like little birdhouses,
Okay.
and
I've never seen them. So yeah.
they're on a pole and they're in people's front yards. And it's called Little Library, and people are free to take and borrow books and put them back. It's a free thing. They're called Little Libraries. There's millions of them all over the country. And so I always like writing emails about things that people see all the time but never talk about. And I'm like, I've seen these for years, but nobody ever mentions these little libraries. Like, where do they come from? They're bizarre. Do people really use them? And so I took a picture of one while walking my dog, and I came home and I'm like, I want to write this in an email because it's entertaining to me, which means I'm going to write an email about it. And so I went to ChatGPT and I said, look, there's these things called little libraries. I'm sure you know all about them. I'm somebody who teaches people how to write story-based emails for their list, blah, blah, blah. Tell me how I could use this observation about little libraries to sell my program about how to write story-based emails. Just give me 5 ways I could do this. And boom, it listed 5 ways tie-ins. And that's pretty much all I did. Now, some of them might have been a little further reach. So if you have, say, Claude trained on your voice, in ChatGPT and Claude, I'm sure other people you've talked to and yourself have created what's known as, what a project is in these tools, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So you just upload all your stuff and go, look, write it in my voice. Like, this is the kind of email I want to write. This is the story I want to use. This is what I'm selling. Make the tie-in, write the email. And if it's trained well on your voice, it'll give you a pretty good output in the first shot. And then you just adjust it from there. The most common thing is it will make a segue that's a little too abrupt. It didn't take enough time. But for the most part, it does a pretty good job. So you just have to ask it. And you can also do this in the reverse. You can also have the value piece of your email, whatever your teaching tip is, and then ask it to come up with a story. You can do that too. A little chicken and egg thing. So I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah, like you either start with I've got the story, but I don't know how to transition. I've got this. I mean, this is how I think about it, thought about it. I remember teaching this stuff back 10 years ago, maybe saying this to people. You start with the story and then you try and figure out how do you connect it to the product, or you start with the product, you work backwards to find a story. You can go either way. Um,
I do them both ways. And I'm trying to think which way is the more common way. Um, yeah,
Probably whatever's just available, right? Some
yeah,
days
well,
I have a story, some days I don't.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I keep a big spreadsheet of both stories and stuff that I want to teach. So I don't know if it's 50-50, but it's pretty close to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, good stuff. Cool. Mate, I want to jump into ChatGPT right now and start trying this. Like, as in after we stop. I don't think it'd be too interesting right now. So I want to try that journalist one. I'm excited. Thank you so much once
Yeah, you're
again.
welcome. Yep, great seeing you.
Yeah, man. Well, I'll wrap it up here. If people want to learn more about you, they want to go deeper down the Bill Muller rabbit hole, where is the best place for them to do that?
Storysalesmachine.com.
Storysalesmachine.com. Cool. I'll have a link to that in the download page where people are probably finding the link to watch this. So, yeah, thank you again. And we'll see you for volume 3, I hope, whenever that is.
Yeah, okay.